That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The sun hung low over the forward operating base in Kandahar, casting long shadows across the dust-choked compound. Sergeant Elena Vasquez stood at attention in the pre-dawn formation, her boots planted firm on the packed earth, the weight of her M4 carbine a familiar anchor against her shoulder. The air carried the sharp tang of diesel from idling Humvees and the faint metallic scent of gun oil from the rifles lined up in inspection. Around her, the platoon formed precise ranks. 24 men and women, all in desert camouflage, their faces etched with the quiet resolve of another long day ahead. "Platoon, attention!" The command snapped from Lieutenant Harlan, his voice cutting through the murmur like a blade. Boots shifted in unison, heels striking the ground with a rhythmic thud that echoed off the blast walls. Elena's eyes fixed forward, on the horizon where the Hindu Kush mountains loomed like silent sentinels. She was 28, a combat medic with the 75th Ranger Regiment, but today her role blurred into something more personal. Attached to her hip, via a taut leash, was Rex, her German Shepherd partner, his black and tan coat dusted with the same fine sand that clung to everything. Rex's ears perked at the lieutenant's voice, his dark eyes scanning the line with an instinct sharper than any human's. Elena had been Rex's handler for 3 years, since he'd come stateside from a K9 breeding program in Germany. Their bond was forged in the grind of patrols and the hush of night watches, where his nose could detect explosives buried under layers of debris long before the tech caught up. In formation, he sat statue still at her left, his flanks rising and falling in steady rhythm, a mirror to her own controlled breathing. No words passed between them. It was in the subtle cues, the slight tension in her grip on the leash, the way his head tilted toward her, that loyalty spoke loudest. The routine briefing followed, maps unrolled on a makeshift table under the chow tent's awning, fingers tracing patrol routes through villages pocked with IED threats. "Vasquez, you're on point with Rex for the Orphanage run," Harlan said, his gaze lingering on her for a beat longer than necessary. It wasn't suspicion. It was the weight of command, knowing every decision rippled down the chain. Elena nodded crisply. "Yes, sir." The orphanage detail was humanitarian, delivering supplies to a cluster of mud-brick buildings on the outskirts, a neutral ground amid the insurgency's shadow. But nothing was truly routine here. One wrong step, and the air could fill with the crack of AK fire. By mid-morning, the convoy rolled out, 2 up-armored trucks grinding over rutted roads, rotors of an overhead Blackhawk chopping the sky for overwatch. Elena rode in the lead vehicle, Rex wedged between her knees, his nose twitching at the influx of new scents through the cracked window. The handler's manual was clear. K9s stayed mission-focused, leashes secure, distractions minimized. But as the truck slowed at the orphanage gates, rusted iron framing a courtyard alive with children's voices, Elena's resolve frayed at the edges. The building was a squat, weathered structure, its walls scarred by sandstorms and neglect. Orphans milled about under the watchful eyes of a local matron, their faces a mix of curiosity and wariness. The platoon offloaded crates of rice, blankets, and medical kits, stacking them methodically, while Harlan coordinated with the translator. Elena knelt to unclip Rex's leash for a sweep of the perimeter, his paws padding softly over the gravel as he quartered the ground, tail low and alert. No threats registered, just the faint acrid whiff of cooking fires and the underlying rot of uncollected waste. It was then, amid the controlled chaos, that the violation began, not with gunfire, but with a child's touch. A girl, no older than 10, approached Eleanor as she distributed bandages from a kit. Her name was Aisha, the matron said, eyes hollow from malnutrition, her hijab frayed at the edges. Aisha's hand reached out, not for the supplies, but for Rex. The dog froze, then leaned in, his broad head nudging her palm with a gentleness that belied his training. Elena watched, her throat tightening. Protocol dictated distance. No unnecessary interactions. Keep the canine professional. But Aisha's fingers trembled as she stroked Rex's fur, whispering words Elena couldn't understand, her face lighting with a rare spark. "Sergeant," Harlan called from across the yard, his tone clipped. "Wrap it up. We're not here for playtime." The words landed like an order, pulling Elena back to the chain of command. She straightened, signaling Rex to heel, but Aisha clung to the dog's collar a moment longer, her eyes pleading. In that instant, the moral test crystallized. Duty demanded they move out, supplies delivered, no attachments formed in a place where goodbyes were permanent. Compassion whispered otherwise, a fleeting connection in a world stripped of softness. Elena hesitated, her hand hovering over her dog tags, the stamped metal warm against her chest. They bore her name, blood type, and service number. A soldier's identity, forged in the fires of enlistment. Without a word, she slipped the chain over her head and pressed it into Aisha's small hand. "Keep this safe," she murmured, the translator relaying it softly. It was defiance, small and seismic, leaving a piece of herself behind, a talisman against the isolation. Harlan's eyes narrowed from afar, but he said nothing, yet. The convoy pulled away minutes later, dust swirling in the truck's wake. Rex whined once, low in his throat, as if sensing the fracture. Elena stared out the window, the orphanage shrinking to a dot on the horizon. She told herself it was nothing, a gesture, not insubordination, but in the rigid world of ranks and routines, even a whisper of conscience could echo through careers like a fault line. Back at base that evening, as the platoon debriefed under the harsh glow of sodium lamps, Harlan pulled her aside. "Vasquez, what was that back there?" His voice was even, but the question hung heavy, probing the boundary between obedience and the human cost of war. Elena met his gaze, steady. "Just a kid, sir. Needed something to hold on to." Rex lay at her feet, his head resting on her boot, a silent ally in the gathering storm. The incident report would come later, filed quietly in the ops log, a minor notation amid the daily tallies of patrols and threats. But for Elena, it marked the start of a ripple, one that would span years and test the very bonds she held dear. In the quiet hours before lights out, with the base humming its nocturnal rhythm of generators and distant calls to prayer, she felt the absence of her tags like a missing limb. Loyalty, she realized, extended beyond the leash to the unseen threads connecting one life to another, even across the divide of uniforms and orders. The days blurred into a rhythm of patrols and protocols following the orphanage run, the base a fortress of routine amid the relentless Afghan sun. Elena Vasquez rose before Reveille, her bunk in the women's quarters, a narrow cot squeezed between lockers, stacked with field manuals and spare ammo pouches. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee from the mess hall and the ever-present dust that sifted through every seam. She dressed methodically, camouflage trousers tucked into boots, dog tags absent from her neck, a void she covered with a plain chain from her kit. Rex waited outside the door, his paws scraping lightly on the concrete as she emerged, his tail giving a single measured wag in greeting. "Morning, boy," she murmured, clipping his leash with a soft click that echoed in the pre-dawn quiet. Their morning run was non-negotiable, a circuit around the perimeter fence, Rex quartering the ground for anomalies, while Elena maintained a steady jog, her breath syncing with his. The chain link rattled faintly in the breeze, and beyond it, the flat expanse of the Helmand Valley stretched under a sky streaked with fading stars. No words were needed. Rex's flank brushed hers occasionally, a reassurance in motion. He was more than a tool, Handler logs documented their paired certifications, but the bond ran deeper, unspoken, like the pulse of a shared heartbeat. Back in the squad bay, the platoon assembled for PT, push-ups on the gritty tarmac, then sprints that left boots scuffing black marks. Lieutenant Harlan oversaw it all, his whistle sharp, eyes scanning for lapses. Elena felt his gaze settle on her during cool-down stretches, a subtle pressure amid the grunts and heavy breathing. The incident at the orphanage hadn't escalated yet, no formal reprimand, just a note in her personnel file, flagged for unauthorized personal item transfer. But whispers circulated in the chow line. A medic bending rules for a kid, soft spot showing through the armor. She ignored them, focusing on her tray of MRE reheated slop, Rex dozing under the table with one ear cocked toward the door. That afternoon brought the test's sharper edge. The unit's K-9 coordinator, Staff Sergeant Mills, summoned her to the kennel block, a low bunker of chain-link runs where dogs bayed in response to the handlers' voices. Mills was a wiry veteran, his uniform starched despite the heat, clipboard in hand like an extension of his arm. "Vasquez, sit rep on Rex's last sweep," he began, but his tone shifted as he closed the gate behind them. The air inside was humid, laced with the earthy musk of wet fur and kibble. Rex padded to his run, settling with a sigh, while Eleanor stood at ease. "It's the tags, isn't it?" Mills said. Not a question. He flipped a page, revealing the ops log entry. Harlan forwarded the report. "Personal effects aren't souvenirs for locals. You know the reg. Chain of command approves all interactions." Elena's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "Sir," it was a gesture. "The girl, Aisha," she latched onto Rex. "No security risk." Mills leaned against the fence, his eyes narrowing under the brim of his cap. "Gestures have consequences, Sergeant. We're not social workers. We're rangers. That kind of thing erodes discipline. What if every trooper starts handing out trinkets?" blurs the line. The words landed like a reprimand drill, forcing her to recount the moment. The dust motes dancing in the courtyard sun, Aisha's small fingers curling around the metal, the faint jingle silenced as Elena walked away. Mills listened, then shook his head. "Rex is mission critical. You tie him to civilians, you tie yourself. Report for retraining tomorrow. Full K-9 protocol refresh, and get new tags issued, no exceptions." He dismissed her with a nod, but the encounter lingered, a crack in the facade of order. Outside, as she reattached Rex's leash, the dog's nose nudged her hand, sensing the tension in her grip. They walked the compound paths in silence, the crunch of gravel underfoot a steady counterpoint to her thoughts. Evening brought the violation into sharper focus. During the platoon briefing in the ops tent, canvas walls fluttering in the wind, projector humming with satellite imagery, Harlan addressed the group. Maps glowed on the screen, red pins marking hot zones, but his preamble veered personal. "Discipline isn't just about the fight," he said, voice carrying over the folding chair's creaks. "It's about the small choices that keep us whole. Recent aid run, solid execution, but we stick to script. No deviations." Eyes flicked toward Elena, then away. The room's air grew thicker, charged with unspoken judgment. She sat ramrod straight, Rex at her side under the table, his warmth a quiet anchor. Afterward, as the team dispersed to bunks, a junior specialist, Ramirez, fresh from Fort Benning, cornered her near the latrines. The concrete path was slick from a rare evening shower, puddles reflecting the floodlights. "Heard about the tag, Sarge," he said, keeping his voice low, respectful. "Kid probably treasures it, but LT's pissed, thinks it's a weakness." Elena paused, water dripping from the eaves. "Weakness is ignoring what's human out there, Ramirez. Rex knows it. He felt it too." The specialist nodded, saluting before vanishing into the shadows, but the exchange amplified the ripple. Words spread through the ranks like radio static, testing loyalties. Some saw her as reckless, others as the rare voice of conscience in a machine of orders. That night, Elena lay awake in her rack, the barracks humming with snores and the distant thump of mortars from the artillery range. Rex curled at the foot of her cot, his breathing deep and even, a reminder of bonds unbroken. She traced the empty space at her throat, imagining the tags in Aisha's hand, cool metal against sun-warmed skin, a soldier's promise carried into uncertainty. The moral fault line widened. Obedience demanded she bury the act, file it under lessons learned, but conscience pulled harder, whispering of the girl's hollow eyes, the way Rex had lingered. In the rigid hierarchy, such pulls could fracture careers, yet they also forged something enduring. By week's end, the reckoning loomed. An Inspector General inquiry arrived via encrypted email. Routine follow-up, they called it, but Elena knew better. Harlan scheduled a private review, his office a Spartan box of filing cabinets and a desk scarred by years of use. As she entered, saluting crisply, Rex heeling at her side, the air held the faint ozone of impending storm. "Vasquez," Harlan began, gesturing to a chair, "this isn't just about tags, it's about trust in the chain." She met his eyes, steady, the weight of 10 years' service and one small defiance hanging between them like the leash in her hand. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first hints of sand, as if the desert itself braced for what came next. The door to Lieutenant Harlan's office clicked shut behind Eleanor, sealing in the hum of the base's generators and the faint patter of sand against the window pane. She stood at attention, Rex sitting precisely at her heel, his nose twitching at the unfamiliar scents of ink and polished wood. The room was a study in austerity, a single bulb casting stark shadows over stacks of personnel files, a US flag drooping slightly in the stagnant air, and Harlan's desk, its surface etched with the ghosts of countless briefings. He gestured to the metal chair opposite, but Elena remained standing, her posture unyielding. "At ease, Sergeant," Harlan said, his voice measured, like a range officer calling ceasefire. He leaned back, fingers steepled over a manila folder stamped with the IG seal. Inspector General, the institutional watchdog that sniffed out cracks in the chain before they widened. "This review isn't punitive, yet, but we need to address the orphanage incident head-on. Your actions, handing over classified personal effects, violate Reg 620 on conduct and fraternization. Explain it again from your perspective." Elena drew a breath, the air tasting of stale briefing paper and the faint, lingering trace of Harlan's aftershave. Rex shifted minutely, his flank pressing against her calf, a silent cue of solidarity. "Sir, the detail was humanitarian. Supplies delivered, perimeter clear. The girl, Aisha, connected with Rex during the interaction. She was malnourished, isolated, no family, per the matron's report. The tags were a token, not intel. No risk to ops or security." Her words came crisp, rehearsed from nights replaying the moment in her bunk, but beneath them lay the raw edge of conviction. Protocol was clear. Dog tags stayed with the soldier, a lifeline for ID in the chaos of dust-ups, or worse. Leaving them behind blurred lines, invited questions about judgment under pressure. Harlan nodded slowly, flipping open the folder. Inside, grainy photos from the convoy's dash cam showed the courtyard exchange. Aisha's small form reaching for Rex, Elena's silhouette bending to press the metal into her palm. "Tokens have weight here, Vasquez. You're a medic, a handler. Your decisions echo. What if that gesture inspires copycats? A specialist slips a knife as a memento. We maintain order to survive." His eyes met hers, not accusatory, but probing the moral fault line. Outside, a Black Hawk's rotors thrummed low in the distance, a reminder of the patrols that waited, unforgiving. The review stretched into procedural territory, timelines cross-checked against the ops log, witness statements from Ramirez and the translator. Elena recounted Rex's role, the dog's calm amid the children's chaos, his nose confirming no hidden threats in the shadowed corners of the orphanage. Harlan jotted notes, the pen scratching like claws on concrete. Rex performed flawlessly, he conceded, but handlers aren't exempt from the code. This could flag your certification, reassignment, even stateside desk duty. The words hung. A potential fracture in her career, the bond with Rex her anchor in the storm. As the session wrapped, Harlan stood, extending a hand across the desk, not in camaraderie but finality. "I'll forward recommendations to command. Keep it professional, Sergeant. The chain holds us all." Elena saluted, crisp and precise, then turned for the door. Rex rose fluidly, his leash taut in her grip, but as they stepped into the corridor, the base's pulse quickened. Word of the review had leaked, as it always did in tight quarters, radios crackling with sidelong glances, specialists murmuring over MREs in the mess tent. By midday, the violation spilled into public view. The platoon gathered for a mandatory stand-down in the motor pool, engines ticking cool under the relentless sun, the air shimmering with heat haze. Harlan addressed them from atop a Humvee, his voice amplified by the concrete walls echoing back. "Recent events remind us, discipline isn't optional. Aid runs save lives, but deviations undermine the mission. Questions?" Hands stayed down, but eyes darted to Elena, standing front rank with Rex at her side. His ears flicked at the tension, body language broadcasting what words couldn't. Then Specialist Ramirez stepped forward, unbidden, a breach in itself, but born of the quiet loyalty she'd sparked. "Sir, permission to speak?" Harlan nodded warily. Ramirez faced the group, his uniform sweat-stained, voice steady. "Sarge Vasquez's call at the orphanage, it humanized us. That kid, Aisha, saw something real in Rex, in her. We're not just gear, we're the line between order and oblivion out there." Murmurs rippled, a mix of nods and frowns, the motor pool alive with the scent of hot oil and unspoken divides. Harlan's jaw tightened, but he let it play, the reckoning unfolding before witnesses. 50-odd rangers, mechanics wiping grease from hands, all bearing silent testament. Elena felt the weight settle, her pulse sinking with Rex's steady pant. No outburst, no drama, just the raw exposure of conscience under scrutiny. Harlan dismissed the formation with a sharp, "Carry on," but the damage, or progress, was done. As the group dispersed, boots crunching gravel toward the barracks, a senior sergeant clapped her shoulder lightly. "Held the line, Vasquez. Rex, too." The gesture was small, but it widened the ripple, challenging the rigid script of obedience. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the razor wire, Elena walked Rex along the perimeter, the fence humming with embedded sensors. The desert wind carried whispers of reform, informal talks in the squad bay about handler protocols, perhaps allowances for controlled interactions on aid details, but the cost lingered, her file marked, trust tested. In the kennel later, as she brushed Rex's coat, removing embedded burrs with careful strokes, the dog's head rested on her knee. The wet warmth of his fur grounded her, a loyalty purer than ranks or reports. Yet the true test loomed beyond the base, etched in the tags she'd left behind. 10 years would pass before the echo returned, a teen's hand extending them back, not as reprimand, but redemption. For now, in the hush of Afghan nights, Elena Vasquez stood at the crossroads of duty and heart, the chain of command bending, if only slightly, under the force of one quiet act. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The inquiry's shadow lingered over the base like the perpetual haze of dust storms, settling into every briefing and patrol. Elena Vasquez moved through her days with mechanical precision, her new dog tags, a fresh set issued from supply, cold and unmarked by years of wear, chafing slightly against her collarbone. They felt like a replacement part, functional, but devoid of the history etched into the originals. The faint scratches from a Humvee rollover in Helmand, the patina from sweat-soaked runs under the sun. Rex sensed the shift in her rhythm, his steps sinking closer during morning circuits, his nose occasionally bumping her hand, as if to reaffirm the bond that no regulation could regulate. 2 weeks after the motor pool stand-down, the institutional response crystallized in a formal hearing. The location was the command post's annex, a prefab module ringed by sandbags, its interior cooled by a wheezing AC unit that hummed like distant artillery. Eleanor arrived at 600, uniform pressed, Rex's certification papers tucked under her arm. The panel sat behind a folding table. Harlan, stone-faced, Staff Sergeant Mills, clipboard at the ready, and a major from Brigade HQ flown in via Chinook, his flight suit still bearing the creases of travel. The air carried the sharp bite of fresh-brewed coffee from a percolator and the underlying must of recycled documents. "Sergeant Vasquez," the major began, his voice gravelly from rotor noise. "This hearing addresses potential lapses in conduct per AR 620 and K9 handler directives. State your case." Elena stood at parade rest, Rex seated alertly beside her, his flanks rising in calm cadence. She recounted the orphanage detail methodically: convoy ETA, supply offload, Rex's clear sweep, nose to the ground, tail low, no alerts on the spectrum analyzer. Then the moment with Aisha, the girl's tentative reach, Rex's instinctive lean, the tags passed in a breath. "It was an error in judgment, sir," she said, eyes forward, "but rooted in the human element of the mission. Aid isn't just crates, it's presence," Mills interjected, sliding forward a printout of the reg. "Personal effects remain with the individual. No transfers without approval. This sets precedent." Harlan remained silent, his fingers drumming a subtle tattoo on the table, the sound echoing like Morse code in the confined space. The major reviewed the dashcam stills, the images grainy under the fluorescent buzz, Elena's form blurred by motion, Aisha's face a smudge of hope. Witnesses were called in rotation. Ramirez, who spoke of the platoon's morale lift, the way the story circulated as a counter to the grind. The translator confirming no sensitive info exchanged, just a child's grasp on something solid. The hearing dragged into procedural minutiae, cross-references to prior aid runs, stats on K9 interactions in civilian zones. Elena felt the weight of it, the room's air thickening with the scent of marker ink from the whiteboard where timelines were sketched. Rex lay his head on her boot midway through, a subtle press that grounded her amid the scrutiny. No raised voices. No accusations hurled like grenades, just the steady erosion of defense under institutional logic. "Duty protects the unit," the major concluded, "even from our own impulses." Harlan finally spoke, his tone even. "Vasquez has a clean record otherwise. Recommend probation. 6 months restricted duties, mandatory ethics module." Dismissed at 1100. Elena clipped Rex's leash and stepped into the glare, the base alive with the clatter of mess hall trays and the whine of a fuel truck. Probation meant no field patrols, reassigned to base clinic rotations, bandaging sprains, logging vitals. Rex reduced to scent demos for incoming rotations. The demotion stung, a quiet unraveling of her role, but it opened cracks for reflection. In the clinic's sterile bay, amid the beep of monitors and the tang of antiseptic, she reviewed handler logs by lamplight, Rex dozing under the exam table. The entries blurred, deployments tallied, alerts confirmed, but the margins held her own notes. On the orphan's hollow cheeks, the way Rex's presence eased their wariness. Word of the hearing filtered through the ranks like radio chatter on an open freck. During evening chow, under the tent's sagging canvas where steam rose from vats of stew, specialists nodded her way, not with pity, but a measured respect. "Heard you took the hit clean," one murmured, passing a tray. Ramirez lingered after, his fork scraping tin. "Panel bought the human angle, Sarge." Harlan pushed for light. Elena nodded, sipping water that tasted of chlorine. "Chain's only as strong as its weakest link. Mine showed." Rex, curled nearby, lifted his head at her voice, eyes locking with hers in that wordless pact. The reform began subtly in the quiet reforms of routine. Mills, overseeing her retraining, incorporated a new module. Controlled engagement protocols for K9s in humanitarian ops. It stemmed from her case, anonymous they called it, but Elena knew the thread. Sessions in the kennel block, chain link rattling in the wind, involved mock scenarios. Dogs interacting with civilians under handler oversight, leashes managed, bonds observed without breach. "Loyalty's a tool, not a leash," Mills said one afternoon. As Rex demonstrated a calm sit amid simulated chaos, puppets mimicking children, scents layered to test focus. Elena watched, pride swelling restrained, the dog's precision a mirror to her own recalibration. By month's end, the ripples extended upward. Brigade Command circulated a memo, dry, procedural, on enhancing morale through measured aid interactions. It cited no names, but Harlan mentioned it in platoon briefings, his voice carrying a new nuance. "We adapt without breaking." Elena's probation held, but invitations came to mentor new handlers on the clinic's edge, sharing Rex's cues in the hush of dawn runs. The base felt altered, the perimeter fences hum a backdrop to evolving orders where conscience wasn't silenced, but channeled. Yet the cost etched deeper. In sleepless watches, when the generator's drone mimicked distant thunder, Elena traced the new tags, cooler now from wear, wondering of Aisha, of the metal warmed by small hands, perhaps clutched during nights of unrest. Rex's head on her lap during those hours, his breath warm and even, reminded her loyalty bridged divides, human and canine alike. The act that fractured her path now mended it, forging a legacy in the system's slow turn. 10 years would unwind that thread, drawing it back across oceans and time. But for now, in the disciplined cadence of base life, Elena Vasquez stood reformed, not diminished, but tempered, her integrity a quiet force rippling through the ranks. The desert wind whispered of consequences yet to come, carrying the faint, imagined jingle of tags long left behind. The years following the hearing blurred into a cadence of transitions, each posting etching deeper lines into Elena Vasquez's face. Now a chief warrant officer, her uniform bearing the subdued insignia of a K9 training coordinator at Fort Bragg. The North Carolina base sprawled under humid skies, its pine-scented air a far cry from Kandahar's dust. But the routines held familiar. Reveille echoes across dew-kissed fields, the sharp bark of dogs in the training yard, boots thudding in synchronized runs. Rex had retired 5 years prior, his muzzle grayed, joints stiff from a lifetime of alerts and healing. He spent his days in a quiet run near her quarters, content with belly rubs and the occasional demo for wide-eyed recruits, his dark eyes still sharp with the memory of shared patrols. Elena's career had weathered the probation like a storm-tossed hull. Restricted duties gave way to commendations for her revamped protocols, now standard in Ranger handbooks. Empathetic engagement in asymmetric environments, a dry title masking the moral pivot she'd forced. She mentored handlers in the low-slung classrooms of the K9 schoolhouse, the air thick with the scent of kibble and gunpowder residue from demo ranges. "Loyalty isn't blind," she'd tell them, voice steady over the hum of projectors displaying Afghan courtyard simulations. "It's measured against the mission and the man or woman next to you." Recruits nodded, scribbling notes. While Rex demonstrated from his padded mat, sitting alert as a volunteer, civilian approached under controlled leash. The reforms she'd sparked rippled outward. Aid units now carried connection kits, non-sensitive tokens approved by command, bridging the human gap without breaching security, but the tags lingered in her mind like an unfinished log entry. New sets came and went, each stamped with her evolving rank, yet the originals haunted dreams, cool metal in a child's palm, the faint jingle lost to wind-swept alleys. Aisha's face, hollow-cheeked and bright-eyed, surfaced in quiet moments. During staff meetings in the ops center, where fluorescent lights buzzed over maps of global hotspots, or on evening walks with Rex, his paws padding softly on leaf-strewn paths, the dog's nose lifting to catch phantom desert scents. Elena had tried tracing the orphanage through official channels, queries routed to State Department liaisons, responses buried in redacted briefs about shifting alliances and closed compounds. The war's end had scattered records like sand, leaving only echoes. It was a crisp October morning in 2033 when the reckoning circled back. Unannounced and seismic, Elena was in the training annex, overseeing a certification drill, 6 handlers and their shepherds quartering a mock village setup, cardboard huts laced with inert explosive simulants, the air sharp with simulated powder and wet earth from an overnight rain. Radios crackled with commands, "Clear left, advance." She stood on the observation platform, clipboard in hand, her boots planted on damp planks overlooking the field. Rex dozed in the shade nearby, his flanks rising in lazy rhythm, a retired sentinel amid the action. The base PA interrupted the exercise. "Chief Vasquez, report to visitor control. Priority." Her pulse quickened, a familiar tension from old patrols, as she handed off oversight to a sergeant and made for the gate. The visitor center was a squat brick building near the main entrance, its lobby humming with the low murmur of IDs being scanned and the scent of institutional coffee brewing in a corner urn. A young woman waited at the counter, mid-teens, perhaps 18, her frame tall and poised in civilian jeans and a simple jacket, dark hair pulled back under a hijab that echoed faded memories. Her eyes, though locked on Elena with a recognition that bridged a decade. "Chief Warrant Officer Vasquez," the girl said, her English accented but clear, extending a hand. "My name is Aisha Rahman, from Kandahar." Elena froze, the world narrowing to the faint tremor in that voice, the way the name landed like a cleared IED, expected yet startling. She nodded, gesturing to a side room away from the clerk's glances, the door clicking shut behind them. Rex, trailing on a loose lead she'd grabbed en route, padded in and sat, his ears perking at the new scent, a low whine escaping as if memory stirred in him too. Aisha sat across the scarred wooden table, her fingers unfolding a small cloth pouch. "The orphanage closed years ago after the withdrawal. I was relocated, foster programs, then scholarships through an NGO, but this..." She untied the strings, revealing the dog tags, tarnished but intact, the stamped letters, Vasquez, Elena, her old service number, catching the light from a high window. "You left them with me that day. The dog, Rex." He let me hold his collar. It was the first time I felt seen. Her words came measured, rehearsed perhaps from long rehearsals, but laced with the quiet weight of survival, tales of relocation camps, language classes in Kabul, a visa lottery won against odds. Elena reached out, her hand steadied despite the rush in her ears, fingers closing around the metal. It was warmer than she remembered, infused with a life she'd unknowingly shaped. "You kept them safe," she said, voice low, the room's air thick with the patter of rain on the roof outside. Aisha nodded, eyes tracing Rex, who leaned forward, nose extended in cautious greeting. "They were my anchor. When things got hard, Bombings, moves. I'd hold them and think of the medic who bent the rules. It taught me rules can flex for what's right. The confession hung, a mirror to Elena's own trial, the hearing's scrutiny, the probation's isolation, the reforms born from one act's fallout. They talked for hours, the base's rhythm fading, Aisha's journey to the States on a student visa, studying veterinary science at a community college, drawn to animals by the memory of a shepherd's gentle nudge. Elena shared fragments, Rex's retirement, the protocols that now honored such moments without cost. No tears, no embraces. Just the disciplined exchange of stories, leashes of words connecting past to present. As Aisha rose to leave, promising updates via email, Rex rose too, his tail giving a single wag, the bond across species and time affirmed in silence. Word of the reunion spread through Bragg's channels like a commendation memo. Handlers in the yard, nodding with restrained approval. Harlan, now a retired colonel, sending a brief email. Full circle, Vasquez. You held the line. The institution absorbed it quietly, a case study added to training modules. Legacy of engagement, emphasizing how personal integrity echoed through generations. Elena's mentorship expanded, inviting Aisha to guest speak at sessions, her voice detailing the tag's role in resilience. Rex passed peacefully that winter, buried under a simple marker in the base pet cemetery, his collar etched with their shared alerts. In the end, the act that once fractured order became its quiet reformer, a symbol of conscience rippling from Afghan dust to American pines, proving loyalty's reach beyond ranks or borders. Elena wore the return tags now, alongside the new, a dual chain at her neck, their weight a testament to choices that endure. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of She Left Her Dog Tags at the orphanage door. 10 years later, a teen returned them to her. See you in the next one. The faint jingle of tags, once left behind, now echoed forward. A soldier's legacy forged in the unyielding bond of trust and time.